Right. So in today's tutorial, we're going to focus on working through the second stage in the pseudocode process, which is the code outline. And we kind of started doing that with the naming of these variables, but we're going to get into that in earnest today. Okay, so last time we started talking about requirements. We started talking about, okay, what is it that we need this piece of functionality to do? And the next step is to say, okay, what are the basic building blocks that we're going to work with to achieve that functionality? What is going to happen where? And we don't need to know exactly how it's going to happen yet, but we need a rough idea. And the rationale for doing it that way is to just kind of get organized on a high level about all the different pieces you're going to work with before you start to drill down into the specifics of how you're going to achieve what you achieve. And basically what that prevents is spending time trying to solve a problem in one place when it could be much more easily solved in another place because you didn't spend enough time kind of looking at the broad overview. All right, so usually the first step in this process for me is I think of, okay, what are the highest level things in the engine? Okay, those are going to be scripts. So which scripts are we going to need to achieve this? And because this is a very, very specific piece of functionality, I think we're only going to need one script. And we already actually have it, so this is kind of cheating. Usually you wouldn't start writing a script before you'd kind of test it and use pseudocode, but this is a little bit of an exception. So we're just going to call this scale changer. That's our script. And so the basic process is, what are the scripts I'm going to need? What are the variables I think I'm going to need? And again, this is going to change. And what are the functions I think I'm going to need? And where are those functions going to be called? And also maybe like if you're going to need Unity, if you're going to need to interact with Unity components, which components do you think those are going to be? Okay, so we've already got our variables filled in here. And I am just going to add a little bit more detail that like which variables are public or private, because that's kind of important to thinking through the process. So final change amount is going to need to be supplied by the user, and because that's what we're moving toward. Oh, and just one other quick thing before we get into this. Notice that I indented here just to show that, because even though this isn't code, I want to keep this organized. So I've got the name of my script and then my variables indented, and I'm going to have my functions indented as well, and then anything inside of the function be indented. Maintaining that consistency in your styling, even in your pseudocode, makes a huge difference to just being able to read over this later as you're trying to turn it into full-on pseudocode and then finally real code. Okay, so because this is because this is a variable that the user needs to input, we're going to make this a public variable, public final change amount. And again, this is just to tell myself what's going on so that I can think through it. Current change amount doesn't need to be used by the user. It's just going to be what we use to keep track of what we're doing or where we currently are as we're changing the size of the object. So that can be a private variable, and
only 5 minutes
so
left.
we'll just call this private. And then change speed is going to need to be supplied by the user as well, so that can be public. All right, so inside of scale changer, we ask ourselves, what are we probably going to want to do? So because we know we want to incrementally change the size of the game object, the first thing we can infer is that we probably are going to want to do something inside of update. So I'm just going to go in here and go in update. And again, just indent it, and this is just a way that I can read back to know this is going to happen in this place. And inside of update, we're going to call a function that's going to actually create the functionality we want. So I'm just going to call change scale. So once a frame, it's going to call this function that's going to be responsible for incrementally changing the size of the game object. So let's go down here. So I indented for the stuff inside the function. I'm using sentences here, not code. There's no punctuation. This is really just trying to distill down pure understanding of what you're going to do. So then here in change scale. All right. So this is the meat of what we're going to achieve in this piece. So how are we actually going to do this? How are we actually going to change the scale? So we're going to incrementally, I think it's going to be two major pieces. We're going to change this current change variable until it reaches this final change amount. And we're going to change it in increments that are dictated by this change speed. That's going to be one piece. And then we're going to set current change amount, whatever it's currently at, in our transform using transform.localScale, because that's what we learned about in our test. So those are the two pieces. So I'm going to try and turn those into two sentences that encapsulate kind of what's going on. So let's do incrementally increase current change amount by change speed until it reaches final change amount. Okay, that's the first part. And then so each frame we're going to incrementally increase it, and then we're going to set current change amount in transform.localScale. Okay, so that's the basic idea of what's going to go on inside of this function. And this actually, as far as I can tell, encapsulates all the functionality that we need. If we build this out in this way, and turn this into real syntax, and then attach this to a game object, this will meet all of our requirements. So we can, well, this will let us incrementally change the size of the game object, and it lets us specify the rate of change. So we've achieved everything we need to achieve with this stage. Just a couple of things to note before we move forward. Notice how these aren't full line-by-line descriptions. Like there's probably going to be an if statement in here, but I'm not describing that if statement. This is more just, this is going to happen inside of this function in whatever form. This is going to happen inside of this function, and then also this is going to happen inside of this function. So it's not code, and it's not a line-by-line description of what's going to happen. It's a general idea of what's going to be achieved in each place.